This is the Roller Coaster Podcast, and I'm your host, Lucy Q. Life is a wild ride. It has twists and turns. It's scary, exciting, and downright fun. So throw your head back, arms in the air, and come along with me for the ride.
Life is like a roller coaster, baby, baby. I wanna ride.
Sometimes our darkest moments give us our greatest gifts, but often we can't see that at the time. It's only after we've grown or started a new chapter that we can realize the beauty that was hidden inside. Joining me today is Joseph Holmes, author of The Power of Angels and a spiritual warrior, to share how he turned his dark night of the soul around. Welcome to the roller coaster, Joseph.
Hi, Lucy. Great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
So where does your story begin?
Well, my story actually began when I was 7 years old. And every summer, we would go visit my grandparents in Arizona. And on the way back home to San Diego, we would stop to visit someplace. And this particular summer, my parents decided to stop in Nogales, Arizona. And for me, my parents wanted to go there because of the dog races across the border in Nogales, Mexico. And for me, I wasn't interested in dog races, but I thought it was cool that Nogales, Arizona had a city right across the border with the same name. For some reason, that was cool to a 7-year-old. Anyway, we got in late at night. Once we pulled in, we just went to bed at the motel. And the next morning, I woke up, everybody was up, my two brothers and my parents were up getting ready to walk to breakfast. I was still in bed. And I was laying there when, at the time, all I could call it was a wave of peace. Peaceful energy entered the crown of my head, went through my body and out my feet. And nothing like that had ever happened before. I didn't know what to make of it, but it felt good, so I wasn't afraid. And then I got up, got ready. We were walking to breakfast, waiting for the light to turn green so we could cross the street. And it happened again to me. I didn't know it at the time, what it was. I was later told that it was the grace of Mary Magdalene. Now, this story is very important because later on, when we talk about doubts and fears, the things that stop most people from following their hearts, it becomes very important. So I'll come back to this story later on when we're talking about the doubts and fears. But that's how it all started. And again, I didn't know what it was. I didn't know it was angels or anything like that, just felt good. And then nothing ever happened again until years later in 1988, when I was visiting a friend, John Lawrence. And he was in his 90s. I had never been to his home before. He invited me over to read my aura. And I'd never had my aura read before. So I thought, well, I'm curious, and I wanted to get to know John a little better. So I went over on a Sunday morning, and he wanted to meditate before he read my aura. So we had a coffee table between us, so we were facing each other, and we began meditating. And then sometime during the meditation, John kicked one of the legs of the coffee table. And, he's 90 years old. I thought, well, maybe I don't want to interrupt the meditation, but I better check on him. So I just kind of opened my eyes just a little bit. And he was looking above my head, like, when you see somebody in the movies that sees a ghost, their eyes are just like saucers, right? And he was just fixated above my head. Well, I knew it was okay, so I just closed my eyes and continued meditating. Well, at the end, when it was time for me to leave, he excused himself and he came back and he gave me this crucifix. And I carry it with me to this day. Now, I'm not religious. I'm spiritual, but not religious. So I didn't know quite what to make of it. But he said, this is what I saw hovering above your head while we were meditating. And, I thanked him for it. It was nice, a nice gift. I put it in my pocket and I went up to my car and I got in the car. And when you get in your car and you close the door, right? That's what I did. I closed the door, but when I closed the door, there was this bam, and my vehicle and myself were enclosed in a bubble of white light. And Lisa, I can't tell you how I got home. I have no recollection of that. It was like the car was 3 feet off the ground. But when I got home, my wife had lunch ready, and I sat down to eat. I didn't tell her anything what had happened. I sat down to eat. I picked up a fork full of food, and I brought it to my mouth, and I could only get it to about 12 inches. I couldn't get it closer than 12 inches to my mouth. The vibration of the white light, the bubble, was so refined compared to the vibration of the food. Couldn't penetrate it. So for a week, I could only live on freshly made juices. I couldn't even take store-bought juices. And the juices I had to take, I don't know why, had to take through a straw at the edge of my mouth. Well, I stayed in this bubble of white light, and I don't know if you remember back in the 80s, the rage was the white light, that was the ultimate experience, right? And anyway, so this white light dissipated after a week, and it was gone, and I fell into a depression because, when you're in that state, and then you have to come back and start dealing with the mundane world, it's kind of a shock. Well, anyway, a few years after that, I was at this workshop, and it was a 1-week workshop, started on a Sunday, and that Wednesday we had a breathwork session. If your listeners don't know it, a breathwork is just where you do a very deep breathing, and for a period of time, and it releases a lot of emotions and things. But anyway, there was maybe 12 of us in the room. It was dark. It was at night. We were laying on our backs, and we were breathing for a while. And then sometime during the breathing, this pair of eyes appeared above me. And I thought it was my mom because she had died a few years earlier. But I wasn't sure. But it's just the outline of the eyes. That's all I could see. And they just stayed there above me during the breath work. And then the facilitator said, okay, in 10 minutes, I'm going to turn the lights on. So, bring your breathing down and get ready to sit up and so on. And at that moment, the eyes expanded, and it was Mother Mary. And for those 10 minutes, she bathed me in beams of gold and white light. And so I was perplexed about why. I figured it was good. It must be a blessing, but I was perplexed about why, Well, what happened 2 nights later, I had an out-of-body experience. And we traveled. I had a guide with me, and we traveled, and we came to this where we saw this light in the distance. And I didn't know at the time it was the light of Mary Magdalene. But the guide said, stop me. And the guy said, we can't go there. I said, why not? I want to. He said, no, you'll combust. You can't handle that kind of energy right now. So I came back into my body, and I was in this state of rapture for the next 5 solid months. I couldn't work. I'm a kind of a quiet person. I'd be in the supermarket and just spontaneously, without warning, just start giggling and laughing, just joy. People would stop and look at me. And I call these the light reaches because they made the white light that everybody was talking about was the ultimate spiritual experience. These light regions made the white light look like kindergarten. I mean, it's just no comparison. And I stayed in these light regions for 5 solid months. Then I came out of them. And then a few years later, I was teaching a class. At that time, I had a martial arts dojo. And there was a breathwork session going to happen at the Mission San Luis Rey, one of the 21 California missions in Southern California. And that mission is associated with Mother Mary. So I thought, well, if I take this workshop, maybe I'll have another vision of Mother Mary, which I hadn't had since that time with the beams of light. So I decided to take it. So I announced to my class Friday night. I said, won't be any classes tomorrow. I'm taking a workshop. That's all I said. So I'm locking up the dojo, and this parent comes up to me, and she says, why are you taking the workshop? And Lucy, just without thinking, out of my mouth came, oh, to meet Mary Magdalene. So I'm driving home, and I'm thinking, why did I say Mary Magdalene? I don't have any interest in Mary Magdalene. I want to see Mary again, Mother Mary. Well, anyway, the next morning, 8 a.m., the facilitator says, okay, we're going to do some breathing, and we're going to do it sitting in the chairs. And, my ego is telling me, no, this is not going to work. It has to be like it was originally, at night with the lights out, lying on my back, right? But, I go ahead, I participate. And as soon as we sit down and we start this deep breathing, at the mission, there's this double door without any doors, right? Just this entranceway. And Mother Mary sticks her head around the corner, and she comes up in front of me. She's got Mary Magdalene with her. And they're wearing these long black capes, which I have no idea why they're wearing them, but later on, it ties into my doubts and fears. And they start circling me with these capes and just giggling and laughing, just like having fun with me. And then Mother Mary says, I want you to lie down on your back. And I'm thinking, I can't lie down on my back. Everybody's sitting in the chairs. And right there, at that moment, the facilitator says, okay, everybody to the floor, lie on your backs. So I'm lying on my back. I got my head in Mother Mary's lap, and Mary Magdalene is hovering above me, and she enters my body, and she heals me of my childhood molestations. I was in my 40s at the time. I had never spoken to anyone about my childhood molestations. From that point on, I was able to talk about them freely, like I am right now, write about them. And for your listeners who have never been molested, one of the key points of healing is being able to open up and talk about it. Anyway, they left, and then that was like in 2005. And then in 2012, on my birthday, December 13th, the feast day of Santa Lucia, patron saint of light, Mary Magdalene came to me. She woke me up at 2 a.m. She had me sit down at my desk, and she started dictating poetry to me. And she's been doing that every morning since 2012. So I write them down in these yellow legal pads. And so I got thousands of them because she's been doing it every morning.
So while all of this is going on, until you reach that phase where you received healing, did you ever question what was going on? Because I think for most people, they might start to wonder if maybe they're a little bit crazy. I know,
Sure.
I would. You couldn't help but question, hey, wait a second.
Yeah, I did too. And so, okay, so in December of 2012, she started dictating her poetry to me. And then in April, so just what, 4 months later, I started thinking just that. I gotta be nuts. People, these can't, are these really coming from Mary Magdalene? So I gave her an ultimatum one morning. I said, I want proof. I want proof that, and I want concrete proof, irrefutable. That's not, you can't argue about it. I want proof, like a burning bush, that these are coming from you. So one day went by, nothing happened. She kept dictating the poetry, but didn't answer my ultimatum. And then a week went by, nothing happened. A month went by, nothing happened. And then I kind of just forgot about it because every morning sometimes she'd go 2-3 hours nonstop, So, and then I take those and then later in the day, I put them all into the computer. So it's busy. And anyway, in July, so April, May, June, July, 3 months later after that, after I gave her the ultimatum, she said, I want you to publish these. So I said, okay. So I'm thinking, okay, if I publish these, maybe I should get some reviews, right? And so I didn't want to ask my friends. I wanted some people who are going to be honest with me, right? Critical. And so I went to this website, it has thousands of people in it who provide different services. And I started reading, book reviews, stuff like that. I said, this is going to take forever. So I'm just going to go through the pictures because I'm very visual. So I just started quickly going through pictures of people. And I hit upon this picture of this woman. Her name's Angelina. And now I call, just to distinguish, I call Mother Mary, Mary. I call Mary Magdalene, Maggie. So back in 2012, when she first started dictating these to me, I asked her, I said, do you mind if I call you Maggie? I said, I know Maggie's not a nickname for Magdalena, but next to Melissa, that's one of my favorite names. She said, sure, you can call me Maggie. So at the time, we were calling these love notes from Maggie. That was the name we gave them. Anyway, so I'm looking through this website. I find this woman, Angelina, and she's a model. But Maggie tells me, send her an email. So I send her an email, and all I tell her, Lucy, all I say is, I have some poems. I would like you to read them. I'll pay you for your time to read them. If you want to give me a review, fine. If you don't, that's fine. A good review, bad review, it doesn't matter. I'll pay you for your time. And she writes back and she says, well, no, that's not the service I provide. So I'm thinking, okay, I've got to look for someone else. And Maggie says, no, stay with her. So we went back and forth for 2 or 3 days. And finally, Angelina says, like in exasperation, okay, send me some, and I'll read them. So this time when I send her the poems, I tell her that the poems are from Mary Magdalene, and they're called Love Notes from Maggie because that's the nickname I have for Mary Magdalene. And the next day I get an email from Angelina. This is her. Right? And she says, Joseph, says, I have to tell you this. Says, I love these love notes. But I have to tell you, everybody knows me as Angelina because that's the name my father wanted to name me. But when I was born, my mother wanted to name me Mary Magdalena. And that's on my birth certificate. And when I was growing up in Greece, so one day one of my best friends called me Maggie. And I loved it. And from that point on, only my best friends would call me Maggie. I said, because maybe that part of the world is a nickname for Magdalene. So I said, oh, wait a minute. Is Maggie a nickname for Magdalena? She said, no. One of my friends called me Maggie and I loved it. So it stuck with me. So, and then the next day, I get this poem from Mary Magdalene. She goes, ah, Joseph, when things like this happen, it is magical and fun. Angelina to Magdalena to Maggie. Who would have thought? And from across the sea. And we even look alike. So run, my dear, and jump and sing. That when you look at her, you're seeing me. It still gives me chills when I tell the story. And
Oh,
so
Angelina was your burning bush.
Angelina was my burning bush. And then when I read that email about her friends calling her Maggie, I remember I looked back at her picture and her name, Angelina, Angel, Ina. Angel is in her name, Angelina. And I thought, this is the angel from Mary Magdalene, the burning bush. So that's so to answer your question, yes, and to help your listeners, when you start following your path, the doubts and fears never go away. That's because that's the job of ego. Ego, EGO, is an acronym for edging God out. Ego's purpose is to keep you out of your heart, where your imagination thrives, and keep you in your head where your doubts and fears thrive. That's the job of ego. Well, ego never goes away. So I eventually had to just befriend it. So now whenever ego crops up, instead of fighting it like I used to do, I just say, thank you for reminding me to draw back into my heart, all right, where my angels speak to me. All right. Now, you would think after that burning bush, right, that I would never have another doubt, right? But
That's not the way our minds work.
That's right. This is very important. That's not how ego works. So a few months later, I'm having now that first time I gave Maggie an ultimatum, but now whenever doubt starts to creep in, she just comes in and nips it in the bud. I don't have to ask her or anything. But before that started, I was having some doubts a few months later. And just out of the blue, one morning she said, look up Carlos Castaneda. And for your listeners who don't know, Carlos was an anthropology major at UCLA back in the 60s. He wrote a book. He wrote a thesis he wrote a book for his doctoral thesis, which became an international bestseller, The Teachings of Don Juan. And then a whole bunch of books after that. And anyway, a lot of people criticized Carlos because they said he made it up. None of it was true. And he said, no, Don Juan, the teachings of Don Juan, he went to the desert and became an apprentice of a Yaqui shaman. And Don Juan was the Yaqui shaman. He said, no, I met Don Juan at the bus station in Nogales, Arizona. And they said, well, there's no verification. You're just making it up. Well, so when Maggie asked me to look up Carlos Castaneda, I already knew a lot about him. I'm in anthropology. I have a degree in anthropology. And in fact, my professor, Carlos, listed him in the acknowledgments of that first book. So one day after a class, I went to Dr. Larry Watson, and I said, okay, is it true? Is all this true, or did he make it all up? And Dr. Watson said, well, because they were roommates at UCLA. And he said, all I can tell you is that Carlos would leave for the weekend, and he'd come back on Monday morning before classes. And he said he would never talk about what was happening, but something happened because he was always changed, right? But anyway, that digresses. So anyway, Maggie asked me to look up Carlos. So I Googled Carlos, and I'm just reading stuff I already know. Okay, and I have no idea why she's asking me to do this. But then over in the sidebar, I see this title. It says, I can confirm Carlos Castaneda's meeting with Don Juan at the Nogales bus station. I said, well, that's interesting, because that's where all the controversy is. So I clicked on that, and it's a story. And this guy is talking about how he was traveling in Mexico, and he was going to cross over to the States at Nogales, but he got sick. And so rather than crossing over, he stayed in this little town, it's a suburb of Nogales, Mexico, and to recuperate. And he said that's important because if he hadn't done that, he would have missed the meeting with Carlos and Don Juan. And he knew Carlos. So he recuperated and he crossed the border, and he was waiting to catch his bus when he saw Don Juan and Carlos meeting. Well, name of the town that he recuperated in, which is a suburb of Nogales. The name of the town is Magdalene. And Maggie told me, when you were that little boy, 7 years old, and you felt that wave come to you, that was my grace coming through you. I have lots of stories like this. So yes, you're right. When people, and I think, Lucy, I think there's billions of people on the planet who have their own personal angel stories, but are intimidated from sharing them because just what you said, they're going to be labeled as crazy, so people just keep them inside. But I think I have what's called the Trinity of creating a life full of meaning, significance, joy, love, and success. And that first part of the Trinity is coming out of your angel closet. In other words, start sharing your angel stories with people who it's safe to share them with, right? And then, because when you start doing that and you start reading the other people's angel stories, you set up the groundwork to discover what your gift is, discover what your life purpose is. Why are you here? And once you do that, then you can start sharing your gift. But once you start sharing your gift, you're going to come up against all the doubts and fears that stop most people. All right. So the first part of the book that we're talking about today, The Power of Angels, the first part are my angel stories. I put those in there to encourage other people to start sharing their angel stories. And then the second part of the book is the poetry of Mary Magdalene. And that's through the poetry, she helps the reader discover their gift, start sharing it, and then dealing with the doubts and fears. So that's
Very
kind of what
interesting.
it's all about.
Yeah. Joseph, you have shared with us today the most remarkable story, and you've woven in some very important lessons that I think we all need to hear in this crazy time that we're finding ourselves in. Where is the best place for people to connect with you and to perhaps grab a copy of your book?
Thank you. I have a website. It's jmmlove.com. The J stands for Joseph. MM stands for Mary Magdalene. Love is Mary Magdalene's message that only love is real. So it's jmmlove.com. And there they can connect with me on social media. They can email me. I might say too, if people are intimidated, if they don't have anybody to share the angel stories with, feel free to email me and share them with me. I'll keep them anonymous and respect them. And my email, it's on my website, but it's joseph@jmmlove.com. My book, you can get it through the website, or you can go directly to Amazon and type in The Power of Angels Volume 3. You got to put in Volume 3. If you just put The Power of Angels, all kinds of books come up. So if you put The Power of Angels Volume 3, my book comes right up. It's the first one on there. and you get it in paperback or Kindle form. So,
To connect with Joseph and to grab a copy of his book, make sure you're checking out the show notes. I will have all of the links in there. And Joseph, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your story.
it's been a pleasure, Lucy. Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing what you're doing. It's a great service for humanity.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Roller Coaster Podcast. Want to chat or share your ideas about today's show? Pop me an email at hello@therollercoasterpodcast.com. Don't forget to connect with me on Facebook and Instagram at The Roller Coaster Podcast. Our theme song, Roller Coaster, was performed by The Lucky Setback. Audio editing by the one and only Jeff Quigley of Quigley Creator.
Life is like a roller coaster, baby, baby. I wanna ride, 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 ride. Life is like a roller coaster, baby, baby. I wanna ride, 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 ride. Roller coaster. Ride, ride.